Welcome to Wines and Makers. I'm Kevin. Today we're in the Alexander Valley at the Hawks Winery with Jacob Hawks, and we're really happy to be here today. We've got sunshine after a couple weeks of rain. We're right here in the heart of the Alexander Valley. Jake, thanks for giving us some of your time today.
Thanks for having me.
How'd you score this great property right here in the Alexander Valley, in the heart of it? We've got Jordan, Silver Oak Vineyard, some famous vineyards all around you. How'd you do this?
Well, you know, most of it happened before I was born, actually. My dad and mom first came here in 1971 and bought a place down on Chalk Hill Road, and then bought another place out on Red Winery Road and started farming grapes there. Both those places were prune orchards at the time, and there wasn't a lot happening by way of varietal grape growing around here then. So it happened a long time ago, and it was a lot easier to get land around here than it is now. We were around in there with probably the first half dozen people or so who grew Cabernet here. Everybody argues about who was first. Robert Young might have been first, but my friend Justin Miller says he was first. I don't know. Things really, people have kind of a skewed view of how long grape growing has existed around here. Really, there was stuff that was grown for jug wine here until about 1970, and then maybe a half dozen people started growing Cabernet, and Alexander Valley got famous for Cabernet pretty quickly after that. But yeah, when my dad first came here, there was not a lot going on by way of quality winemaking, and what we mostly did was sell our fruit to Napa, where they were making expensive Cabernet and where people were taking those things seriously then.
And 2002 was Hawks Winery first release?
Yeah, that's right. That's
okay.
Right. That's our first vintage.
And what did you release in 2002? And what did you think of the wines of your first release?
Well, we released Cabernet and Merlot, and mostly what we do is Cabernet. We have 3 different vineyards in Alexander Valley. We grow Cabernet on all 3 of those vineyards, and every year we harvest little lots of fruit from them, from each of those vineyards, pick through them, and make one blend, one bottling from the fruit from those 3 different places. And that's what we did in '02. What did I think of the wine? Our wines don't have a lot of precedent in California in that they're way more old school than most people's Cabernet are. They're really built to age. And we age them for 4 years before they even go on the market for the first time. So we made the 2002 Cabernet, and it wasn't until 2006 that we were selling it. I think it was still young then. It was really good wine, but still young. And now we open that same 2002 Cabernet in the tasting room, and people are just wowed by it because it illustrates the point of making wines that are long-lived and that have structure and integrity, as opposed to just making big old fruit bombs that are ready to go a year after you crush them.
Can you share with us a little insight that how, as a vintner, that you're able to produce a wine that is more age-worthy than one that maybe is not as age-worthy?
Well, more than anything, this stuff has to do with the fruit. I don't think that winemakers, there are winemakers that'll tell you different, mostly, yeah. Winemakers, typically speaking, they think they're responsible for a lot more than I think they're responsible for. I come at this whole thing from the perspective of a grower as opposed to a winemaker, and I don't think we do a whole lot to improve upon what the vineyard gives us. So it's mostly, even in terms of creating structure, it's mostly just about the fruit that you start out with. There's this trend that's occurred over the course of my life to just get things riper and riper and riper and riper. And there are a variety of reasons for that. It makes the wine sweet. With all that alcohol, you end up with a little bit of residual sugar. But it also makes the wine smooth because the tannins have literally been burned out of them. So what we do in order to try and make our wines last, and in order to try and have the nuances that we're looking for in them, is to just harvest the fruit a little bit less ripe. At the same time, we want the fruit to have less alcohol and to have acid and to have tannin, but we want it to have the same level of maturity that other wines might have that were made from grapes of a lot higher sugar. So what we end up doing is figuring out how to starve the vines so that they have really a lot of trouble making the sugar that they need to make before before they just get wiped out by the rain. So we'll end up picking after almost everybody else in the valley, but our sugars will still be lower. The hope there is that we're going to get maximum maturity of the grapes without a whole lot of raisioning, without a whole lot of burning, so that we have the virtue of ripe fruit, but still tannin and structure.
Well, we've got a couple of your wines that we were going to taste today, and which would you like to start with? We have your Chardonnay. Hawks produces Merlot, Chardonnay, and Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yeah, and I was thinking we'd start with our Chardonnay.
Okay.
Keep things simple and just taste our Chardonnay and our Cab.
Okay.
Because the Cabernet is really our signature, but I like the idea of having some kind of clarity of purpose all the way across the line. What I mean by that is that although Chardonnay and Cabernet are really different wines, obviously, it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. I like to think that if people like the style of Chardonnay that we're making, that maybe they're going to like the style of Cabernet that we're making too. In other words, that there should be like an aesthetic sympathy there. And our Chardonnay, all our wines are really fruit driven. We don't use a lot of oak. We don't use a lot of excessive manipulation in the winery itself. We pretty much just try and leave the fruit as pure as we possibly can. That's true for the Cabs, and it's true for the Chardonnay as well. So this Chardonnay is an 06. It's from the vineyard I grew up on Chalk Hill Road that my parents planted there in 1971. And what it's really defined by is the freshness and the clarity of fruit, more than anything else. It's not a big, creamy, buttery Chardonnay in the style of most California Chardonnays.
A good food wine.
A good food wine, yeah. I want white wine to basically do the same thing that beer is supposed to do, which is be refreshing and
oh, that's crisp. That's nice.
Thank you.
But it rolls pretty good though.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a little creaminess to it.
In 06, we put the wine into all old Hungarian barrels and left it on the lees and stirred it and stirred it and stirred it on the lees.
Right.
And I think that in that way we were able to preserve the fruit because we didn't put it through malolactic fermentation, which gives it that creaminess. But we were able to give it a little bit more depth and a little bit more roundness just by that extended lees exposure and by that life in the barrel.
Yeah, does that lees kind of had to contribute to that creaminess? Did you have that in the 05?
You know,
or does a neutral barrel help that, or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. People really worry, most winemakers are really worried, I think, about the idea of exposure to oxygen in their wines, but I actually think it's in limited doses, it's a healthy thing. I think the wine needs a little bit of oxygen. And what's great about aging in barrels is not necessarily the oak flavor, which I don't like all that much, but that actually the barrel breathes just a little bit, and that wine gets just a little bit of air exposure right through the skin of the barrel. Mm-hmm. And that gives it a little bit of roundness, and it gives it, as the wine gets older, it gives it a little honeyed character, which I really like.
It's bright, it's brilliant. There's some, again, in Alexander Valley, you think of Cabernet Sauvignon, at least I do first, but I know, having lived and worked here for 10 years, there's some great Chardonnays. Chalk Hill, I have a tendency to think of Chardonnay, and I don't know if I'm right in thinking that. I mean, I know friends that are growing Merlot and Cabernet over there.
Well, it's a complicated situation. Alexander Valley is a really big appellation, and it's for the most part fairly misunderstood because Napa has got, I don't know, maybe 14 sub-appellations or something like that, you know. There's Rutherford, and then there's Rutherford Bench, and you know, you can stand there with this foot in Rutherford and this foot in Rutherford Bench, and you look at them and you can't even tell the difference. You know, Alexander Valley, on the other hand, is kind of the same shape, long and narrow, running north to south, and it's really geographically diverse, and yet we don't have any sub-appellations. So where this wine comes from is kind of where Chalk Hill is kind of a link between Alexander Valley coming down, running down out of the north, and the Russian River Valley coming up out of the south, and they link up in Chalk Hill. So the south end, the low-lying south end of Chalk Hill Road is cool and foggy like the Russian River,
right.
And the north end of Chalk Hill Road tends to have more in common with Alexander Valley or even Knights Valley.
So is your vineyard for your Chardonnay in that lower cooler?
Our vineyard for our Chardonnay is right down low, right near the Russian River. Yeah, so it's, you know, also you could, if the camera were pointed in the other direction, you could see there are, you know, mountains out here, and those mountains that you're looking at, that's the Chalk Hill region. Right. So you can be growing Cabernet up there, and right. even be getting a breeze off the ocean, and down here, right. It's foggy, and the air sits down there, right. and it stays cool all morning, and it's right. a great place for Chardonnay. So it's hard to farm, but it's I think it's a fascinating appellation.
Very good. Well, we have some Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right. I'm not doing my job here.
I'm holding it right here.
Yeah, this is
the Hawks.
This is an 04 Cabernet Sauvignon, and again, it's about 4 years old when we release it. And it is a blend of fruit off 2 of our vineyards. One we call the Pyramid Vineyard, and it is down on Chalk Hill, and we call it the Pyramid because it's really steep and terraced, and the terraces end up looking like pyramids. And it's a high mountain vineyard, so it's one of those vineyards I was talking about down there, where it's way up and subject to a whole different set of climate influences than the low-lying stuff. It's fruit from that vineyard, and then it's fruit from our Red Winery vineyard, which is just around the corner from where we're sitting right here.
Right.
Out here in Maine Alexander Valley, and it's a lot more mild-mannered. The terrain is nice and rolling. The sun shines. The winds are gentle, and the fruit tends to have a much smoother, more cherry-driven character year in, year out.
Common in some of the Alexander Valley Cabernets.
I think so. I think there is one of the unifying characteristics of Alexander Valley Cabernet is that cherry character. So we try and blend that cherry with some of the smoke that we get off of Chalk Hill here. I better put that on your chair. So I hope we have balance in this wine.
Now this is 100% Cabernet, or do you put a little bit of Merlot in, or is it?
It is 100% Cabernet.
100%?
When we first made wine, we kind of got infatuated by the idea of fooling around and doing stuff that we thought we could tell made a difference, but probably didn't. And at this point, we just harvest the cab, make a bunch of different little lots of Cabernet, and make our final blend out of just Cabernet.
And what about, it's typically 4 years from vintage date before release, and then your barrel time, new barrels, American French oak. How do you take care of the wine in the aging process?
Well, it gets about 2 years in the barrel and about 2 years in the bottle. And we use in the area of 40% new French oak, which is not a whole lot. I like to think that we are trying to make...
Oh, nice soft tannins.
Thank you.
Rolling through.
Thank you.
Real good mouthfeel.
Yeah.
And young, though.
Yeah, yeah, but that 4 years really helps. And the age in the bottle really matters too. I think most people pretty much bottle wine and then go to market with it, and we bottle it and then wait for 2 years of just sitting in the warehouse in the bottle before we even send it out on the market, because I think that's what makes the difference of being able to keep those tannins, but to have them be mature and nice and smooth, like you said.
What about the production on this wine?
We make about 1,200 cases of this wine, depending on the year. As I remember in 04, I think we're around 1,200 cases. We're real small. A total of about 2,500 cases is what we produce on a yearly basis. One of the things that's really different about where I was 2 years ago and where I am now is that people have really responded well to this cab, and it makes me feel good because I know we were doing something different than what's out there on the shelf and what people are used to, and I wasn't sure how people were going to react, but they've really liked it for the most part, critics and the public alike.
And the age-worthiness of this wine, Jake, or what would you say, or when would you, in an ideal world, when would you suggest it be consumed, and or how long should the wine be aged?
Well, a friend of mine once said that good wine is always good, and I think that's true. I think good wine is good from the moment you crush it, or even before that, to after it's gone, whenever that is. So I like this wine now. I think it's drinking really well right now. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't release it. At the same time, I think our 02 and our 04 in particular are really geared to age a long time, and I would expect this wine to continue to get interesting for another 20 years.
Well, there you have it. Jake Hawks, Hawks Winery in the heart of the Alexander Valley. Be sure and stop by the next time you're in the Alexander Valley. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Kevin,
for your time. Enjoyed it.
Me too.